everybody, my name's Chandler Hoisington. I'm the General Manager for Amazon ECS Anywhere, and today I'm going to be talking to you about migrating and modernizing your applications using AWS services and technologies. Far into all the different services and deep into a specific use case on modernizing your applications, I kind of want to go over why are all the reasons you would want to modernize your applications on-premise or outside of a cloud, the cloud regions in the first place. And if I think back actually to when I first got started with Amazon, 10, 12 years ago, I remember thinking, wow, all workloads are going to be in the cloud one day. And while that still may be true, as we continue to move our applications to the cloud, there's actually a lot of reasons why we have to help customers on-prem and at the edge. And some of those reasons are on the screen as follows. So I'll go through these. The first is supporting low latency applications. This might be a use case like a gaming company servicing gamers and competitive gamers in markets where there isn't an AWS region yet. So you might have gamers in Egypt, for example, and there's no AWS region to support the low latency they need to the game servers. And so they want to stand up their applications either in a colo or on an AWS Outpost nearby. Another one might be you want to modernize your applications in your data center before you move them to the cloud. This could be because you have capital expenditures, you bought a bunch of commodity hardware and you don't want to write that all off before you move to the cloud, so you want to modernize your applications in place in your data center before you move them up to the cloud. Another one we see quite often is data residency requirements. So this could be your data simply can't move out of your country or your geographic region or your own data centers for whatever reason. It could be there's a law in your books in your country that we have to be able to shut off internet access to the outside world in case of geopolitical reasons, and your data just has to stay in country, and there's no AWS region yet in your country, so you have to run your own data centers. Another reason to run your workloads on-prem might be edge workloads, and this is a whole nother topic and a whole nother presentation will be dedicated to that, but these are your sensors and the gateways they connect to, and it might be facial recognition software in factories in the Midwest, for example, that make sure the right people are in the right locations of the factories. And those workloads need to obviously run in the factory. Another one, which is the age-old problem that we've all tried to solve many times, is bursting to and from the cloud for a variety of reasons. One might be a Black Friday event to burst for more capacity, either in the cloud or on-prem, or it could be disaster recovery in both directions. Another use case that we're seeing come online, hot and heavy right now, is your 5G and RAN workloads. And the telco space is its own beast and it has its own specific use cases, and I'm actually going to go into that later in this presentation. And the last one that I'll mention is processing your data locally. And this is kind of similar to the factory use case I mentioned earlier, where you might be collecting a lot of data. It might be those facial recognition sensors collecting a bunch of data, make sure the people in the right location in that factory, but then you want to process that data locally instead of sending up to the cloud, because sending up to the cloud could be quite expensive. So we've established there's a lot of use cases still on-prem, and there's use cases that are going to stay on-prem for the foreseeable future. So Amazon wants to help you with those use cases. And how are we doing that? Well, the biggest way we're doing that is to keep it consistent between all the different environments you could be running these workloads. So the way you deploy your workloads in the cloud, you want the consistency that you're going to deploy them as much as possible the same way on-prem and in your edge environments as well. So you don't want to have to train security engineers on deploying workloads in an AWS region a different way than you're training them to deploy workloads on-prem. You also don't want to train your deployment engineers to deploy workloads in region different than you're training them to deploy them on-prem. And the same goes for all the engineers and people who touch your software across the entire stack. So providing that consistency not only saves money, but it saves time and keeps you agile, and it gives you that pace of innovation that you're looking for when you're running workloads when you're using AWS to help run your workloads. So let me start touching on different ways you can actually do this with AWS technology. Now, these are 4 buckets. There are a lot of ways you can run AWS technology and services to help you at the edge and on-prem. This is definitely not an exhaustive list, but I just put up 4 big buckets here. The first is kind of how AWS started in the first place, helping people with compute. And these are just some of the examples of ways that we can help you run workloads at the edge and on-prem. We have Outposts offerings, we have local zones, we have wavelengths, then we have container offerings like ECS and EKS Anywhere, which I'm going to go into more later, and Outposts and Snow, and the list goes on. And the same applies to storage and networking and management. But the key takeaway for this slide is really to understand that we have a consistency across all these offerings, especially when you're consuming storage and networking, and how you're managing those workloads in all of those environments. So let's start drilling down into a specific use case. I don't want to just talk about a bunch of high-level services. I want to talk about containers first. So containers, Amazon is all in on containers. I mean, containers are a great way to run your workloads, not only in a region, but on-prem. And we're hearing more and more from our customers, they want help running their workloads on-prem in containers. And why is that? Well, the first is velocity. Containers can really help you deploy faster and consistently across all those environments. I mean, we heard this with Java back in the day. You know, you build once, run everywhere. Well, that's still the promise with containers. Build it once, package it once, and deploy it everywhere is kind of the way you think about it with containers now. And we're seeing more and more industries and customers adopting containers to help achieve these promises. The second reason might be you want reduced risk. So you want to, again, like I mentioned earlier, you want to build your application for one use case, package it in containers, and be able to deploy that consistently everywhere so you don't have a different security posture in the cloud than you do on-prem or in different environments. The third is quality. It's very important to our customers that when they package their application, they can get a consistent quality for their customers no matter where they deploy it. And lastly, containers can help with operational efficiency. You know, you can get more out of one machine on-prem or one machine in the cloud. Containers can bin pack a lot more into a single use case. So now let's continue to drill down with containers. There's two real offerings that I want to talk about today, although there are a lot of other ways that you can use containers on-prem. But the two ones I want to highlight today are Amazon EKS and ECS Anywhere. Specifically, how you could run EKS and ECS on an Outpost on-prem, but you could also run Amazon EKS and ECS on your own commodity hardware. So the way that would work is if you want to run on an Outpost, you would buy an Outpost from Amazon and rack it in your data center, and you would get the same experience that you have running ECS or EKS in a region in your data center. So that means you can buy an Outpost rack, you can use the same APIs that you're comfortable with in a region, and deploy your application in a region or on your Outpost in EKS or ECS. Now, what happens if you already own your own commodity hardware and you don't want to write off that capital expense yet? Well, in that case, you could run Amazon EKS or ECS Anywhere on your commodity hardware. And drilling into Amazon EKS for a second, as we continue down this analogy, there's lots of different ways you could run Amazon EKS across all of your different edge and data center platforms. So the first one could be Amazon EKS today runs in local zones. It runs in wavelengths. It also runs on Outposts, like I mentioned. And then you have Amazon EKS Anywhere to run on your own commodity hardware. And then if you don't want to use our distribution, or I should say our package distribution of Amazon EKS, like it is with EKS Anywhere, and you just want to stand up your own Kubernetes cluster, you could download our open source project called Amazon EKS Distro and stand up your own Kubernetes cluster in your data center. So moving forward into this use case, I want to also touch on Amazon ECS Anywhere. So the difference here is that when you're running Amazon ECS Anywhere, you don't have to actually manage the Kubernetes control plane in your data center. Instead, Amazon ECS Anywhere, you give it your container in the cloud, and it actually just sends that container down to your data center using an agent on your box. So you don't have to stand up and run etcd and the entire Kubernetes control plane in your data center and have engineers on call for that. It's a much more simplistic model for deploying your container into a data center. But what I want to do now is talk about Amazon EKS Anywhere, because as I promised earlier in this presentation, I want to go down into a specific use case. So let's talk about how you'd use Amazon EKS Anywhere to deploy a workload on-prem now. So Amazon EKS Anywhere, as I mentioned earlier, is running Kubernetes in your own data center, managed by you, the customer, but with Amazon supporting you with the bat phone. And so Amazon EKS Anywhere is consistent and reliable as with EKS in the cloud. So you're going to use very similar tools to manage EKS Anywhere as you would EKS in the cloud. We've simplified standing up that Kubernetes cluster, so it's not as complex as it would be if you're doing this on your own. We've also bundled a set of packages with Amazon EKS Anywhere to augment the Kubernetes experience. Because as many of you know who've run Kubernetes, it's not as simple as downloading Kubernetes and deploying an application in production on it. Kubernetes out of the box is actually not quite ready for production. You have to install networking plugins, and you might need monitoring and logging plugins, and a variety of other applications that need to run on top of Kubernetes to really give you that production and enterprise experience. But when we do all this, we're giving you a one-stop shop for support. So you don't have to go to multiple ISVs to get support for all these different components on your cluster. when you purchase support for Amazon EKS Anywhere from Amazon, we support the entire stack end to end. So that's one call to an Amazon support engineer for support across the entire cluster. And lastly, you're able to utilize your existing hardware, as I've mentioned. So this runs on Dell boxes or Lenovo or HPE or you name it, your own commodity hardware. And if you've made capital investments in that hardware, you can keep those capital investments and run Amazon EKS Anywhere to help you modernize your workloads. So one example of doing that is in the telco and 5G space. So as we know, 5G's come on heavy in the industry over the last few years. And the telco space needs help running workloads at the cell sites themselves. As we've modernized these workloads at these cell sites for 5G, there's a bunch of what they call network functions, which are essentially microservices that need to run in those cell sites. And the telco industry has decided to standardize on Kubernetes for deploying those network functions. And so that's where Amazon EKS Anywhere is helping the telco industry run those essentially microservices. And so this is a very specific use case where they have commodity hardware at cell sites on the edge, and they want a consistent experience across their entire workflow from the cell site to their data center to an Amazon region, and they want to deploy things as consistently as possible. And that's where the telco industry is adopting EKS Anywhere to help them with this problem. They're helping them not only with their Open RAN workloads, but they're helping them in the data center and at the cell sites. So that's just one example where EKS Anywhere is helping an industry vertical modernize on-prem, but there's lots of others. Looking more directly at Outposts for a second, Outposts runs ECS and EKS Anywhere today. So if you buy an Outpost rack and you put it in your data center, you have a 42U rack that can run ECS Anywhere and EKS Anywhere in your data center. And the way it used to work with Amazon EKS Anywhere as of a month ago was that you needed a consistent connection back to an AWS region to run EKS on your Outpost. But now, as of last month, we can now support up to a certain number of days of disconnect in case there's a hurricane that comes through or a weather event of some kind or some other disaster where you lose connectivity to the AWS region, your workloads running on EKS on Outposts will continue to run. So as you can see, I went really deep on one use case today, and I wanted to drill down specifically with Kubernetes, but there's lots of ways to modernize applications on-prem, and I only touched on a sliver of the offerings that Amazon has. So if you have any other questions or other use cases that you're curious about, I almost guarantee you we have a way to help you on-prem and at the edge, and I encourage you to reach out to your SA or whoever your contact is at Amazon and get more information about your specific use case. And that's all I have. Thanks for coming to my presentation, and I look forward to seeing you at the next one.